Welcome back, everybody, to Book 1 of the Ranger's Apprentice, the Early Years series, The Tournament at Gorlan. I'm here with Chapter 27, and we're going to go ahead and get into it. At Errold's invitation, they fetched the other members of their party and dined in the castle that night. The Baron's chef was a smooth-faced young man named Chubb. "He's an artist in the kitchen," the Baron averred, patting his own belly. "Gives me a lot of trouble keeping the weight down." It was apparent that Chubb had the same problem. Obviously, he spent a lot of time sampling his own wares. The other rangers all chorused their approval of the magnificent feast he set out before them. The central piece was a splendid turkey pie, with golden brown glazed pastry, concealing a savory mix of turkey mince, spices, and vegetables. The Baron's wife, a beautiful red-haired woman introduced as Lady Sandra. "Never mind the lady, just call me Sandra," she said, joined them for the meal. She was a charming and gracious host, and the rangers were all captivated by her. Farrell was present as well, and was introduced to his new comrades. Most of them knew him already, of course, if not personally, then by reputation. Farrell was known as a fierce, highly skilled warrior, an adept with the battle-axe in addition to his ranger training, and they all felt they were lucky to have him along as part of their band. When he first arrived, Halt scanned the dining room for a sight of Mistress Pauline, but the beautiful courier was nowhere to be seen. Errold saw Halt's quick look around the room, and the flash of disappointment almost instantly masked, and guessed the reason. "Pauline is getting ready for her mission," he explained quietly to the young Hibernian. "She'll be sending out letters to her agents and informants, and planning her own itinerary." "Of course," Halt nodded, showing no sign of his disappointment. He had hoped to make a better showing in front of the beautiful, graceful woman. He felt he had left her with the impression that he was a bumbling, tongue-tied clod. Now, he thought gloomily, she would retain that picture of him. For once, he would have liked to talk about his past, and impress her with the fact that he was the son of the royal family of Clonmel, and an heir to the throne. That would have dazzled her, he thought. Then, sadly, he realized that it wouldn't have impressed her in the slightest. A woman like Pauline would judge a man on his own merits, not his parents'. He realized that Jurgen was asking Errold a question, and turned to listen. "Will you be defending your title at the tournament, my lord?" Jurgen asked. Errold ate a large chunk of pie, and wiped his greasy fingers on his bright yellow doublet. His wife raised her eyebrows to heaven. For 5 years she had been trying to break him of that habit. "I suppose so," he said, spraying pastry crumbs across the table. "Have to give Morgarath a chance to win it back, won't I?" Halt regarded him with interest. Errold was a little overweight, as he had noticed, but he was also burly and broad-shouldered, and there were muscles underneath that doublet. "You defeated Morgarath in single combat?" he asked. He knew that Morgarath was regarded as one of the most accomplished knights, if not the most accomplished, in Araluen. But this smiling, good-humored, slightly chubby young baron had defeated him. Errold shrugged diffidently. "Good luck more than skill," he said. "I got lucky, and he tended to underestimate me. Never a good idea to underestimate an opponent, even if he's me." He laughed aloud. Halt glanced around, and saw Lady Sandra watching her husband shrewdly. She didn't join in the laughter, and, from her expression, Halt guessed that Errold was making light of his own abilities. In his experience, people who attributed their success to luck often had a lot to do with making their own luck. The dinner broke up around 10 o'clock. Crowley apologized to the Baron for the early finish to the night. "We want to be on the road just after dawn, my lord," he said. Harold nodded his understanding. "I've never known a ranger to sleep in much past sunrise." The others all chorused their thanks as they trooped out of the dining room, making much of the fact that Chubb's banquet was a welcome change after Halt's and Crowley's rough camp cooking, although in truth, they all enjoyed the meals that their two comrades served up each night. "I'll see you at Gorlan on the 3rd day of next month," Harold told Halt and Crowley, as they bade him good night. He gripped both their hands firmly and looked deep into their eyes. Theirs was a dangerous undertaking, but he saw no sign that either of them would flinch from it. Chubb hurried up to them as they were about to go, with a white cloth bundled around a large section of turkey pie. "It'll be fine to eat cold on the road for your lunch tomorrow," he said, and they took it gratefully. Harold watched the two men descend the stairs, their soft boots making virtually no sound on the flagstones. Then, as they went through the high doorway and out into the castle yard, he returned to the dining hall, where he had a flagon of good wine to finish, and where Sandra was waiting for him. "They're a good group of men," she said, and he glanced keenly at her. He respected her opinion in such matters. Always had, he realized. "You think so?" She nodded. "Well-trained, loyal, expert archers. 11 men like that will make a group to be reckoned with." "They are rangers, after all," he said. "Real rangers. Not like the pretenders that Morgarath has been palming off on fiefs for the past few years. I'm particularly impressed with their leaders, Crowley and Halt," he added. Sandra took a sip of her wine. "Crowley is their leader, isn't he?" Harold acknowledged the statement. "He's been elected as their leader, but the others look up to Halt just as much as to him. They'll obey Crowley, but Halt is the sort of man you follow instinctively." "Even you?" She smiled, but he took the question seriously. "Yes. Given the right circumstances, I'd follow him. He's a natural leader." The door flew open, and Pauline Dulacy rushed into the room, slightly flushed and a little out of breath after running up 2 flights of stairs. She looked quickly around the dining room, saw the empty chairs pushed back from the table, and the servants clearing away the remains of the meal, and her face fell. "They're gone?" she asked. "A few minutes ago," Harold told her. She looked around, as if wondering whether there might be time to catch up to them, then realized that she hadn't seen them crossing the castle yard as she ran toward the keep. They'd be well ahead of her on the way to their camp in the forest, she thought. "Oh, I wanted to say goodbye to Halt," she said, then added quickly, "and to Crowley as well, of course. Halt and Crowley." The Baron and his lady exchanged a knowing look. So that's the way the wind blows, thought Harold. Over the years, he'd seen at least a dozen bold young knights try to impress the beautiful courier. She had politely fended them all off. But now, this bearded, beetle-browed Hibernian seemed to have sparked her interest. He wondered if he should mention the fact that Halt had been looking for her, then decided that, if he did so, his wife might hit him with the wooden serving ladle that lay close to her right hand. "Of course," he said, hiding his smile. He noted with relief that Sandra moved her hand away from the heavy ladle. "But we'll see them all at the tournament." She nodded, a little distractedly, he thought. "Yes, of course," she said. "Well, I'd best get back to my office. I still have a few orders to send out with tomorrow's post." She gave a perfunctory curtsy and exited, closing the door behind her rather abruptly, so the room echoed with the noise of it. "Well, well," Saunders said. "Pauline the Hibernian. Who would have ever thought?" Harold smiled. "I saw it coming," he said smugly, patting his stomach with both hands in a contented way. His wife looked at him, eyebrows raised in disbelief. "Of course you did, dear," she said. He wondered when she had become so sarcastic. Half an hour after daybreak, the Rangers were on the road again. This time, as Halt had suggested, they broke into 3 groups, leaving a gap of 10 minutes between them to avoid raising the curiosity of anyone who saw them. Halt and Crowley rode together at the head of the first group. After some minutes of companionable silence, Crowley glanced sideways at his friend, and said in an overly casual tone, "That Mistress de Lacy is quite a woman." Halt looked quickly at him, and grunted something that Crowley took to be agreement. Hiding his grin with some difficulty, the red-haired man continued, in the same overly casual voice, "I thought that when this is all over, I might call upon her." He stared straight ahead, but when Halt said nothing, he stole a glance at his friend. Halt wore a stricken expression. The thought of his friend Crowley, witty, urbane, and totally at ease with woman, paying court to the stunning young courier, was too much for him to bear. Had it been any other man, he might have offered to fight him. But Crowley was a friend. More than a friend, in truth. Halt had come to think of him as a brother. In fact, he held him in a higher regard than his real brother, who had tried to murder him to gain access to the throne. "Good thinking," he managed to croak. "Wish you both well." Crowley looked at him again, startled by the break in his voice. Halt wore a miserable expression that tore at Crowley's heart. He leaned over and seized Halt's forearm. "My friend," he said sincerely, "I was joking, that's all." Halt shook his head doggedly. "No, really. Why would I care if you saw her?" he said, his voice thick with emotion. Crowley shook his arm. "Do you think I'd do that? I can see how much she means to you, Halt. And I rather think," he added thoughtfully, "that she returns the feelings." Halt looked at him quickly, suspicious that Crowley, ever the trickster, was joking now. But Crowley met his gaze steadily, and nodded. "Did she say anything about me?" Halt asked. His spirits fell when Crowley shook his head, then rose again with his answer. "No, not in so many words, but it was pretty obvious that she was interested in you. Didn't you see the way she looked at you when you told Harold about Morgarath offering you a job?" Halt shook his head. "No, I didn't notice." All he could remember was that he had inadvertently used a rather crude expression in front of her. He flushed now as he thought of it. "Well, take my word for it," Crowley said. "She was pretty impressed. And amused. And that's always a good thing with women." Halt rode on, facing forward, his mind racing. "And trust me," said Crowley, who had kissed 2 women in his entire life, and one of them his mother, "I know about women." Halt felt a warm glow suffuse his breast at his friend's words. "Yes," he said happily, "I should think you do." The conversation about Pauline was interrupted as they rounded a bend in the road. Crowley reined in Cropper, Halt matching the action with Abelard. "Does that person look familiar?" Crowley asked. Halt leaned forward to peer more intently at a figure sitting on the side of the road, leaning back against a tree. He was wearing a cloak like theirs, but with the cowl pushed back to reveal his white hair and beard. A gray horse was cropping the long roadside grass a few meters away from him. It wasn't tethered or hobbled, which marked it as a ranger-trained horse. There was something very familiar about the seated figure. For a moment, they stared at him. Then recognition dawned. "Pritchard!" they both said at once, and, clapping their heels to their horses' flanks, set off at a gallop to greet him. All right, that's going to be the end of chapter number 27. As always, thank you for joining me, thank you for listening, and I'll see you next time in chapter 28. God bless, and have a good one.